Good morning. As Stuart said, my name is Andy Davies. I'm a designer and illustrator at Mule. I'm at Outstandy on Twitter, on Dribble, Instagram, and literally everything else because I'm just going to run that pun into the ground. Like I mentioned, I work at Mule. Some of you may know us from the really fantastic work we've done with the San Francisco Opera, with the Wikimedia Foundation, and the Audubon Society. A lot of you also know us from my boss, Mike Montero. Mike featured my giant head in his last talk, so I'm now returning the favor. So I've been working at Mule for about a year and a half now. I started by interning my last semester of college. I knew with graduation impending that I didn't know enough. I didn't have any real experience. So I wanted to learn from someone who really knew the craft, who knew the intricacies of being a professional designer. So I cold emailed Mike asking if they ever hired interns. And I heard back the next day. So I went in, I interviewed, and they hired me. And it was nothing like I expected. So in my mind, interning was more like this. And in reality, it was more like that. So I started working, and at times it could be really frustrating, and sometimes incredibly weird. I started keeping a Tumblr called Mike Made Me to journal all that stuff. It's the basis for this talk. So to kind of set the tone, my first day, Mike decides he wants to get our then studio manager these Kimmy Schmidt light-up sneakers. And he needed to know what size shoes she wore. So my very first assignment that day is to find out what size shoes she wears by specifically stealing her shoes. The rationale being he needs to learn to be stealthy. So let that set the stage. And one note before I start, though this talk is about learning specifically with Mike because he's really been my mentor, in reality I've learned from everyone at Mule. From our strategists and from our researchers, our developers, the other designers, the project managers who have taught me not to blow things wildly out of scope. So thank you guys. But those stories are not nearly as weird as Mike's. So here is Mike Made Me. And lesson number 1, no regrets, or the sorry jar. As you'll no doubt hear at some point this morning, I've got a habit of saying sorry when I don't actually need to apologize. It's this kind of default instinct. It's a response. It's automatic. This annoys Mike because that instinctual apology creates this kind of subservient dynamic. So about a month after I started working, he declares the sorry jar. Now, the sorry jar is an empty bottle of bullet whiskey into which I have to put $1 every time I use sorry in a non-apologetic context. But this is not a passive exercise. He decides he's going to break me of this habit once and for all. And he starts ambushing me. He comes up behind me and mumbles vaguely important sounding things. And inevitably, I turn around and say, sorry, because I can't hear it. At which point, he just glares and points at the jar. So over the next 3 weeks, I lose about $30, which as a college student is not insignificant. And it forced me to be more deliberate with what, how, and when I spoke. And now I disagree with removing sorry from my daily vocabulary completely, but in client services, it's a really, really important distinction. As designers, we are constantly fighting to assert our place as our clients' peers. We're design experts to whatever their area of expertise is. And so apologizing unnecessarily and subconsciously acting below them, it breaks that down. It puts us beneath them. We're communications experts. and that expertise needs to carry over from not just our work, but also to our conduct. Language is a huge part of how we communicate that ideal dynamic. And so this lesson made me more deliberate with my word choice, made me calculate what I'm saying. How we're speaking, and especially how we're writing, is absolutely critical. Lesson number 2, edge cases, or a website for ants. So even though I wear glasses, my prescription is pretty pathetic. I have a habit of setting type really, really small because I like my work really airy. I like a lot of room to breathe. Anything over like 14 point feels huge. So this annoys Mike, since he's someone who has a real prescription and would like to build things that most people can actually read. So he makes me remove my glasses when I'm typesetting because my eyes are not terrible enough. I then continue to set type really small. So now Mike is exasperated, and he makes me run to the Walgreens 3 blocks away to buy drugstore reading glasses. The most powerful magnification I can find, which is like 3.5x. It's ridiculous. It's like smearing Vaseline on your eyeballs. And it works. I can't see a damn thing. I set everything bigger, I open up my leading, and make something that someone over the age of 45 can read. It's a lesson in designing with empathy, because I was only designing for myself. I'd never really considered what it's like to try to read a website with less than stellar vision, or about conditions like glaucoma, which really narrow your cone of vision and require a narrower measure, or color blindness, whose different variations make certain colors totally indecipherable. It's made me more conscientious. These were cases I'd never even considered, challenges I didn't know about in terms of user experiences. And this lesson taught me I have to be open to being corrected, to being wrong, and to thinking beyond my own capabilities, so I can build things for people who aren't me. Lesson number 3, don't be precious, or the day of 100 headers. To this day, I've got pretty vicious, perfectionist tendencies, like I imagine almost everybody else here does as well. And that tendency, if I'm not careful, it really slows me down. I get really finicky, I get really detailed when I don't need to be. I need to pixel perfect align things, and it does not solve the bigger issues. And so one day, we get a project in the shop that needs these typographic illustrations done. And that first day, I draw like maybe 4 or 5. And it takes me the whole day because I'm getting really precious with it. I'm like trying to mask things out exactly, and I want them to be absolutely perfect. And this annoys Mike, because in an agency, time is literally money, and the longer I take, the more it costs him. So the next morning, I come in, and he bets me that I can't make 100 of those illustrations in a single day. So being powered entirely by spite, I take it up. Ignorant that an 8-hour workday is 480 minutes by 100 headers, leaves me 4.8 minutes per illustration, assuming I don't eat or pee all day long. But I get to work. And as I'm working, the office starts taking a pool. They start taking bets as to how many I finish. And the bets are really low. They're like 20 or 25. And I'm just mad. Like at that point, I'm just like rage illustrating. And at 5:52, for the record, I'm rolling along, and Mike bets me the office pool to throw it at 99, just so the PM, who has bet that I will finish, will lose. And then it's 5:57, and I save out that last PSD, and I am triumphant. I am just full of glory, and I turn to Mike, which is glowing, and all he says is, "So, did you export them to JPEG?" Now, crushed dreams aside, this was a lesson in not being perfect. I couldn't get finicky. I couldn't get really, really detailed. I had to get it done. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing our work can be, is done. It needs to be good too, but no client has ever cared how good your unfinished work is. And not perfect doesn't mean not good. Though I cranked these out in a single day, the client liked the work so much that the artwork ended up being used on everything, on their banners, on their signage, on their playbills. And this lesson really taught me that it was important that even though the work wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be, it was exactly what the client needed it to be. And now lesson number 4. Say no, or why I stopped updating Mike Made Me. It's been about 6 months now since I last updated Mike Made Me, and it's over. And that's a good thing, because there's a very specific reason I stopped updating it. Because through all this weird stuff I had to do early in my time at Mule, I learned to say no. I learned I don't have to do the weird things Mike asked me to. The first time I said no, it was a little thing. We were working on a UI for a client project, and Mike wanted to make a change that I thought made things harder to use, made it more difficult. And so I said no. And we talked about it. We talked about why I felt it made it harder to use, and why I wouldn't do it. And ultimately, he made me do it anyway. But there was a spark there. I could say no. And I don't mean say no like just to be an asshole. I mean say no because I'm learning to consider what and why he was asking me to do things. What was the lesson he wanted to drive home? I mean, did he just want to see if the intern would do something stupid? Which was often yes. But in the former case, I'd still say yes to things because I understood why he wanted me to do it, why it was important. But more and more, I said no because I realized I could disagree. I could express a disagreement because I'd learned to argue and advocate for it. And that's the most precious and valuable lesson I'll ever learn from him. No is verbal gold. It lets you push back against someone else's bad decisions, which, as a designer, we have a responsibility to do. Our skill set is uniquely oriented towards finding and solving problems. And it lets you refuse tasks because you already have enough to take care of. We tend to accept any work that comes our way because we're like some sort of stress vacuum, just taking anything we can possibly worry about. So saying no, it saves money, it saves effort, it saves sanity. And for me, it means I've learned to say no to clients to making the logo bigger. So there were a lot of frustrating things I had to do early in my time at Mule, but none of it was a waste. There were maybe sometimes unintentional little Miyagi-like lessons in even the most asinine things I got slapped with. Lessons I'm still learning from and using today. Every day I have to remember to communicate exactly what I mean, to design beyond myself, to get it done, and to say no when I need to. Mike made me do a lot of weird stuff. But through that, and sometimes despite it, Mike did make me a better designer. So thank you.